Millionaire sees wheelchair-bound boy feeding his daughter, and it changes his life. Richard Blackwood gazed despondently out the window of his 40th floor office in the tallest commercial building in New York City. Even surrounded by symbols of his success, something inside him felt as hollow as the distant look in his daughter Emily's eyes during their rare encounters. It was during a routine visit to Hope Recovery Center, an upscale rehabilitation facility in the Upper East Side of the Big Apple, that Richard witnessed something that shook him to his core. A boy around 8 years old, confined to a wheelchair, and wearing a simple light blue t-shirt, was offering Emily a piece of navel orange. What struck him most wasn't the gesture itself, but his 5-year-old daughter's reaction, a genuine smile, something he hadn't seen since the accident that left her with selective mutism 8 months earlier. "Mr. Blackwood, shall we continue the consultation?" Dr. Catherine asked, interrupting the businessman's moment of reflection. "Who is that boy?" Richard discreetly pointed to the scene unfolding in the clinic's garden. "Oh, that's Matthew. He comes 3 times a week for physical therapy. An extraordinary child considering everything he's been through," the doctor replied with a warm smile. Richard adjusted the gold watch on his wrist, a reflexive gesture when he felt uneasy. "And why is my daughter interacting with him? Where's Caroline?" "The caregiver is right there watching. We think it's healthy for Emily to interact with other children. In fact, this is the first time I've seen her truly engaged with anyone since starting treatment." The businessman nodded slowly, torn between relief at seeing his daughter express emotion and the unsettling realization that someone else was achieving what he, with all his wealth and resources, could not. "We need to discuss Emily's quarterly report, Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Catherine continued, adjusting her glasses. "Unfortunately, we're not seeing the progress we'd hoped for. The selective mutism is deeply entrenched and—" "How long has that boy been coming to the clinic?" Richard interrupted, still watching the children. The doctor sighed. "Matthew's been with us for about 6 months. His mother is struggling financially to keep up with his treatment. It's quite touching, I imagine." Richard finished, his tone bordering on sarcasm, though his eyes remained fixed on his daughter. Emily was now accepting a second piece of fruit, and something in her expression had shifted. She looked more alive. "Actually, I was going to say inspiring," the doctor corrected. "Mr. Blackwood, I know your time is valuable, but we really must discuss Emily's treatment. The specialists are concerned that—" Richard's phone buzzed insistently. It was Michael, his business partner, likely calling about the acquisition of the new hotel chain, a multi-million-dollar deal demanding his immediate attention. Without hesitation, he silenced it. "Doctor, I'll need to reschedule this meeting. I believe I'll be staying longer today." The surprise on the doctor's face was evident. In 6 months of treatment, Richard Blackwood had never extended his visits beyond the bare minimum required for formalities. In the garden, under the shade of a maple tree, Richard moved closer to observe the interaction. The boy was speaking animatedly, gesturing with one hand while the other held a worn-out lunchbox. "And then the ladybug flew up to the sky, but promised to come back the next day to play with the little ant," Matthew was saying as Emily listened with rapt attention. Richard didn't recognize that expression on his daughter's face. For months, her eyes had seemed distant, as if searching for something lost on the day of the accident. Now there was a spark in them. "Do you want more orange?" "My mum always says oranges make you strong," offered Matthew, handing another slice to Emily. To Richard's astonishment, his daughter nodded and took the fruit. A simple gesture, but monumental for a child who refused interaction, even with the most patient therapists. "Sir?" A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Caroline, Emily's caregiver. "We didn't expect you to stay. Should I take Emily home now?" Richard shook his head. "No. Let her play a little longer." The businessman stepped back and sat on a nearby bench where he could observe without interfering. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, but for the first time in years, urgent work messages seemed insignificant compared to what he was witnessing. A woman in her 30s, dressed in a simple but impeccably clean uniform, approached the boy. "Matthew, sweetheart, we need to go. I have to catch the bus to make it to my second shift on time." "Just 5 more minutes, Mum," I'm telling my new friend the story about the ladybug, the boy pleaded, his eyes begging. The woman smiled kindly. All right, 5 more minutes. She noticed Richard watching and nodded politely, not recognizing him as the owner of one of the country's largest business conglomerates. Richard felt something strange in his chest. That woman probably worked 2 jobs to pay for her son's treatment, yet she could still smile like that. Meanwhile, he could barely spare 2 hours a week for his own daughter, always delegating her upbringing to nannies and staff. When the 5 minutes were up, Matthew said goodbye to Emily. I'll be back on Thursday, okay? Then I'll tell you what happened to the little ant next. To everyone's complete surprise, Emily leaned in and kissed the boy's cheek before walking away with Caroline. The caregiver looked at Richard in shock, and he understood. It was Emily's first spontaneous act of affection since the accident. Right then, Richard decided he needed to know more about that boy. Much more. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next day, Richard cancelled 3 important meetings, something unthinkable in his meticulously planned schedule. Sitting in his duplex penthouse overlooking Central Park, he reviewed the report delivered by Jason, his head of security, with information about Matthew and his family. Matthew Sullivan O'Brien, 8 years old, diagnosed at 4 with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare degenerative condition. Mother, Amanda Sullivan O'Brien, 34 years old, a housekeeper by day and a pharmacy clerk by night. Residence, a modest apartment in a housing complex on the outskirts of Queens. Father, unknown, not listed on the birth certificate. The attached photos showed a small but excessively tidy home. In one image, Richard could see a shelf with a few well-preserved children's books, and on the wall, Matthew's drawings carefully pinned up. What caught his attention the most, however, was a photo of Amanda helping Matthew with his homework, both smiling as if no hardship existed in the world. Jason, how is this possible? Richard murmured, more to himself than to the security guard standing by the window. What, sir? How does this woman who works 2 jobs and raises a child with special needs alone manage to keep this joy? I have everything, absolutely everything money can buy, and I can't even make my own daughter smile. Jason, accustomed to hearing only orders and rarely personal reflections from his employer, simply gave a discreet nod. Richard continued flipping through the report. Matthew attended an adapted public school, where he maintained good grades despite frequent absences for treatments. Medical expenses consumed nearly 70% of the family's income. The basic health plan didn't cover specialized therapies, forcing Caroline to rely on social programs and the generosity of Hope Recovery Center, which offered some subsidized spots. I want you to prepare an anonymous deposit to cover all that boy's medical expenses for the next 5 years, ordered Richard, closing the folder. Sir, if I may... Jason hesitated, a rare break in his always professional demeanor. We looked into it a bit deeper, and Mrs. O'Brien has refused 2 offers of financial help in the past. She seems extremely proud. Richard raised his eyebrows. Refused money? When she has a child in that condition? According to our sources, she'd only accept help if it came from an official program, or if she knew exactly where it was from and why, explained Jason. Seems she's had bad experiences in the past with, let's say, self-interested assistance. The businessman fell silent for a moment, digesting the information. A woman who worked 16 hours a day refusing money on principle. That didn't fit into his worldview, where everything and everyone had a price. His phone rang. It was Michael again, likely to remind him of his absence from the meeting with the Japanese investors. For the second time in 2 days, Richard ignored the call. Jason, I need you to arrange something for me. It's urgent. On Thursday, Richard arrived at Hope Recovery Center an hour before Emily's scheduled session. He wore considerably simpler clothes than usual, swapping his Italian suit for jeans and a discreet polo shirt. From a distance, he watched as Caroline arrived with Matthew, the boy excitedly telling a story that made his mother smile as she wheeled him through the clinic's immaculate halls. He waited patiently until the boy went in for his physical therapy session, then approached Caroline in the waiting room. "Excuse me, are you Matthew's mother?" he asked, with a kindness he rarely used in daily interactions. Caroline looked up from the worn book she was reading to pass the time. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "Actually, I hope so. My name is Richard. I'm Emily's father. I think our children met here at the clinic." Caroline's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, yes." "Matthew won't stop talking about his little friend who doesn't speak but understands everything. Your daughter is lovely." "Thank you." The word felt strange coming from his mouth. Richard wasn't used to thanking people. Usually they thanked him. "Actually, I wanted to talk about something that struck me. Since the accident, Emily hasn't shown interest in anything or anyone. But with your son, she smiled. She even made physical contact." Caroline closed her book, giving the conversation her full attention. "Matthew has that gift. I always say he was born with sunshine in his heart. He lights up everyone around him." Richard felt something catch in his throat. How could this woman speak of her son with a degenerative disease as if he were blessed, not limited? "I know this might sound odd, but Emily's been in treatment for months with no progress. Would it be possible, maybe, for the children, to spend a little more time together?" The words came out with difficulty. Richard Blackwood wasn't used to asking favors. Caroline studied him for a moment. "How often does your daughter come here?" "Twice a week for therapy. I admit I haven't been as present as I should. I work a lot." "I understand." There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. "Matthew loves making friends. I'm sure he'd be happy to spend more time with Emily. I bring him here on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays." Richard nodded, grateful for the absence of questions about the accident or his personal life, so often dissected in gossip magazines. "May I have your contact?" he asked, already extending his latest model phone. Amanda smiled, pulling out a simple, worn phone from her pocket. They exchanged numbers, and Richard felt an odd satisfaction in performing such a mundane gesture, something he'd usually delegate to his executive assistant. "I need to rush to work as soon as Matthew's session ends, but I'm glad our kids hit it off," said Amanda, putting her phone away. "Where do you work, if you don't mind me asking?" "During the day, at a family home in the Upper West Side. At night, at a pharmacy near my place." She noticed Richard's look and added with dignity, "2 jobs are necessary to cover Matthew's treatment, but I don't complain. We're blessed in many ways." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. While he complained about the pressure of managing a fortune, this woman worked 16-hour days, cared for a sick child, and still considered herself blessed. Before he could respond, the door to the physical therapy room opened, and Matthew emerged in his wheelchair accompanied by the therapist. "Mom, look what I did today," the boy exclaimed, showing how he could lift his arm slightly higher than the week before. "I'm so proud, sweetheart." Amanda leaned in, kissing her son's forehead. "Look who's here, Emily's dad." Matthew's eyes lit up when he recognized Richard. "Hi, mister. Is Emily coming today? I brought more oranges for her." Richard's throat tightened. "Hello, Matthew. Yes, she should be here soon." "Awesome." The boy grinned despite the obvious exhaustion after his session. "Today, I'll tell her the story about the chick who wanted to be an astronaut." Just then, Richard saw Caroline arriving with Emily through the clinic's main entrance. The girl, usually expressionless, looked around as if searching for something or someone. When she spotted Matthew, her face changed subtly. She didn't quite smile, but her eyes came alive. "Look who's here, Matthew," said Amanda, waving at Emily and Caroline. Matthew immediately asked his mother to push his wheelchair toward them. "Emily, you came. Look what I brought you." From his worn lunchbox, the boy pulled out a small navel orange, carefully peeled and sectioned. He offered a piece to Emily, who, to Caroline's astonishment, took it without hesitation. Richard watched the scene, mesmerized by his daughter's transformation. For a brief moment, he saw the Emily from before the accident, the curious, lively girl who'd been lost the day the car she was in with her mother rolled over on Interstate 95. Hannah, his ex-wife, had walked away physically unharmed, but couldn't bear the trauma of seeing her daughter retreat into silence afterward. 3 months later, she left for London, where she started a new relationship, visiting Emily only sporadically. The separation had been just another business transaction for Richard. Asset division, financial agreements, and generous monthly support in exchange for full custody. He'd thought his money could solve any problem, even his daughter's selective mutism. Just hire the best specialists. Now, seeing how Matthew's simple presence did more for Emily's recovery than months of therapy with renowned professionals, Richard began questioning his entire worldview. "Mr. Blackwood, doctor, Catherine can see you now," one of the receptionists informed him, interrupting his thoughts. "Tell them I'll be a little late," replied Richard, without taking his eyes off the children. Caroline, the caregiver, approached him. "Sir, I've never seen Emily like this. It's almost a miracle." "Yes, Caroline, I see it too," murmured Richard, unable to articulate the storm of emotions he felt. Amanda glanced discreetly at her watch. "Matthew, sweetheart, we need to go now. Mommy can't be late for work." The disappointment on the boy's face was clear. "But Mum, I haven't even finished the story about the astronaut chick yet." Without a second thought, Richard intervened. "If you'll allow me, I can take Matthew home later. Or perhaps the children could spend the afternoon together. I have a driver and security, and I promise I'll take good care of him." Amanda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "That's very kind of you, sir." "Richard, please." "Mr. Blackwood, but Matthew has a strict routine. His medications, his schedule." "I understand." Richard stepped back, realizing he'd been too hasty. It was just a suggestion. Matthew looked from one adult to the other, confused by the sudden tension. "Mom, can I at least finish the story, please?" Amanda checked her watch again, visibly torn. Richard noticed her dilemma and had an idea. "Amanda, I know we've just met, but I have a proposal." He lowered his voice so the children wouldn't hear. "I own Blackwood Enterprises. I can offer you a job with flexible hours and a salary significantly higher than both your current jobs combined. That would allow you to spend more time with Matthew while still maintaining his treatment." Amanda's eyes widened. "You're Richard Blackwood?" "The Richard Blackwood?" Richard nodded, uneasy with the recognition. This was why he usually avoided personal interactions. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwood, but I have to decline," Amanda replied firmly, though kindly. "I don't accept favors based on pity, especially when they involve my son." "It's not pity," Richard hurried to say. "It's a fair exchange. Your presence, and Matthew's, is helping my daughter in a way no expensive treatment has managed. So far." Amanda smiled understandingly. "I truly understand your concern for Emily, but I can't accept a job just because my son became friends with your daughter. That wouldn't be right." For the first time in years, Richard Blackwood found himself at a loss for words. In the business world, he always got what he wanted, whether through money, influence, or pressure. But here, faced with this simple, dignified woman, his usual tactics didn't work. "However," Amanda continued, seeing the disappointment on Richard's face, "if you really think their friendship is beneficial, we could arrange weekend meetups when I'm off work. Maybe a picnic in the park or something like that." Richard felt unexpected relief. "That would be wonderful, truly wonderful." "Mom, can I show Emily my astronaut book on Sunday?" Matthew asked, clearly having been listening. Amanda smiled at her son. "If Mr. Blackwood agrees, we could meet at Central Park on Sunday morning." "Sunday is perfect," Richard agreed immediately, mentally cancelling his scheduled golf meeting with potential investors. That night, after putting Emily to bed, something he usually left to the nanny but decided to do himself, Richard sat in his study and did something he hadn't done in years. He reflected deeply on his life. On the desk before him were scattered photos of Emily before the accident, a smiling, curious, vibrant little girl. Next to them, a recent portrait, empty eyes, distant expression. The transformation broke his heart. How had he not noticed before just how profound the change was? His personal assistant, Victoria, gently knocked on the door. "Sir, the board is quite upset about your cancellation of the meeting with the Japanese. Michael called 6 times today." Richard looked up from the photographs. "Victoria, how long have you worked with me?" 12 years, sir," she replied, surprised by the unexpected question. "And in those 12 years, how many times have you seen me spend an entire afternoon with Emily?" Victoria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I don't think it's appropriate. Please, Victoria, be honest. The assistant sighed. Before the accident, a few times a month after, today was the first time. Richard nodded, absorbing the impact of that simple truth. And do you think I'm a good father? The silence that followed was answer enough. Thank you, Victoria. You can go home now. Tomorrow, we'll reorganize my schedule. Alone again, Richard picked up his phone and impulsively typed a message to Amanda. Thank you for today. I can't explain what happened, but I saw my daughter again for a few moments. If you need anything from Matthew, anything at all, please let me know. No conditions, no strings attached. Surprisingly, the reply came almost immediately. The only thing Matthew needs is friends who see him beyond the wheelchair. Emily seems to do that naturally. See you Sunday. Richard smiled at his phone screen, feeling a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, he was genuinely looking forward to the weekend. Sunday dawned with an extraordinarily blue sky over New York City, as if nature itself had conspired to make the park outing perfect. Richard, accustomed to delegating all event preparations to his staff, surprised everyone by insisting on personally arranging the picnic details. Sir, we can send the chef to prepare a full buffet on site, suggested Victoria, still stunned by her boss's sudden change in behavior. No, Victoria, this isn't a corporate event. Richard thought for a moment. Actually, let's keep it simple. Sandwiches, fruit, juice, things kids like. And no excessive staff, just the driver and one discreet security guard. As Emily was being dressed by her nanny, Richard found himself doing something unprecedented, choosing his own outfit for the outing. He set aside his expensive formal suits and opted for jeans and a polo shirt, the most casual his wardrobe allowed. Daddy, are we going to see Matthew? The question came as a shock. Emily had barely spoken since the accident, and she never initiated conversation. Richard knelt to meet her eye level. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to see Matthew. Are you excited? Emily nodded, her eyes brighter than they'd been in months. Richard felt his heart tighten. How had he not realized how much he was missing by keeping his distance? When they arrived at the meeting spot in the park, Amanda and Matthew were already waiting under the shade of a large tree. Matthew waved excitedly from his wheelchair as they approached. Beside him, an old checkered blanket was spread on the grass. We took the bus, so we got here early to secure a good spot, Amanda explained, as she helped Matthew settle onto the blanket. Richard discreetly observed the contrast between the two families, while his driver unloaded a gourmet picnic basket and pure linen cushions. Amanda and Matthew had brought a simple bag with homemade sandwiches and a worn thermos. Emily, I brought my astronaut book to show you, Matthew exclaimed, pulling out a well-loved children's book from his backpack, its pages slightly wrinkled from use. To Richard's surprise, Emily immediately ran over to sit beside the boy, fascinated by the book. He saved for 3 months to buy that book at a used bookstore, Amanda whispered softly. It's his treasure. Richard felt a tightening in his chest. Emily had a bookshelf full of expensive books at home, many still in their original plastic wrap, gifts he ordered from international trips, but never had time to deliver in person. What do you usually do on weekends? Asked Richard, trying to start a conversation as he watched the children. Amanda smiled. It depends. When the weather is nice like today, we always try to come to the park. Matthew loves being outdoors. Other times we stay home playing board games or go to the public library. He adores story time on Saturdays. The simplicity of the answer made Richard reflect on his own weekends. Meetings, golf with investors, business dinners. Emily usually stayed home with the nanny. And you? What do you do with Emily on weekends? Amanda asked. The question hit Richard like a punch. I usually have commitments. He stopped, suddenly feeling ashamed. To be honest, we don't spend much time together. My schedule is quite busy. Amanda nodded without judgment. I understand. It must be hard balancing business with family life. How do you manage? The question slipped out before Richard could stop himself. Working so much and still having energy for all this? Amanda looked at Matthew, who was now excitedly showing Emily the constellations in the book. It's not a choice for me. After Matthew's father left us when he found out about the diagnosis, I realized it was just the two of us against the world. My son taught me what real strength is." Richard absorbed those words, watching how Matthew, despite all his physical limitations, radiated a joy that his money could never buy for Emily. "Daddy, look," Emily approached, holding the book open to a page about the solar system. It was the first time in months she had addressed him directly with enthusiasm. "That's great, sweetie. Do you like planets?" Richard was surprised by how little he knew about his own daughter's interests. "Matthew said one day we'll travel to Mars together," Emily explained, with a confidence she hadn't shown in a long time. "And we will," Matthew confirmed, moving closer in his chair, with Amanda's help. "I'm going to be an astronaut and I'll take Emily as my special assistant." The conviction in the boy's voice was touching. There was no trace of self-pity or limitation in his dreams. The picnic unfolded in an atmosphere of simplicity and joy that Richard hadn't experienced in years. Emily laughed at Matthew's stories, ate sandwiches with her hands without worrying about formalities, and seemed more alive with each passing minute. While the children were distracted by a game Matthew had brought, Richard and Amanda talked about their children's treatments. The doctor said physical therapy is helping slow the progression, but Amanda hesitated, lowering her voice so Matthew wouldn't hear. "We have to be realistic about the future. His condition will gradually worsen." "Isn't there any experimental treatment? International specialists?" Richard asked, immediately thinking of the possibilities his money could offer. Amanda smiled sadly. "There are some promising studies in Europe, but they're beyond our financial reach. For now, we're focused on ensuring the best possible quality of life." Richard felt determination growing inside him. Here was something concrete he could do. "And Emily?" Amanda asked, changing the subject. "Do the doctors have any explanation for the selective mutism?" Richard sighed. "It's psychological, according to the specialists. She didn't suffer physical injuries in the accident, but the trauma..." He looked at his daughter, who was now laughing at something Matthew had said. "This is the first time I've seen her like this since the accident. Not even the most expensive therapists achieved what your son did naturally. Children have a special way of communicating with each other," observed Amanda. "Matthew has always had an easy time making friends, even with his condition. He doesn't see himself as different." As the afternoon wore on, Richard noticed Matthew beginning to show signs of tiredness, though he tried to hide it to keep playing with Emily. "I think it's time we head home, sweetheart," said Amanda gently, noticing it too. "But Mom, we're having so much fun," protested Matthew, though his eyes were already heavy. "We can meet again next week," Richard quickly suggested. "Maybe at the zoo or wherever you'd like." Matthew's eyes lit up again. "The zoo? Emily, do you want to go to the zoo?" Emily nodded enthusiastically, a gesture that filled Richard's heart with hope. As he helped Amanda pack up and settled Matthew back into his wheelchair, Richard made a decision that would change the course of several lives, including his own. "Amanda, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Matthew's treatment." Amanda looked at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "We can talk during the week. Today was for the children." Richard agreed, respecting her stance. As they said their goodbyes, Emily surprised everyone with a spontaneous hug for Matthew, who returned it with a beaming smile. On the drive home, Emily stayed awake, gazing out the car window with a thoughtful expression. "Did you enjoy the picnic, sweetheart?" asked Richard, feeling as though he was relearning how to talk to his own daughter. "Yes, Daddy. Matthew is my friend," Emily replied simply. But to Richard, those words meant the world. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Richard sat in his office and made a series of calls he would normally delegate to his team. The first was to Dr. Mark Peterson, one of the country's top neurologists. "Mark, I need a personal favor. I want you to consult on a boy named Matthew Sullivan O'Brien, Duchenne muscular dystrophy." Richard spoke while typing an email on his computer. "Yes, I know it's not your specialty, but I need a second opinion from someone I trust. And more, I want a full rundown of experimental treatments available worldwide. Cost is no issue." The second call was to his lawyer. "Rachel, I need you to set up a foundation. specializing in muscular dystrophy and other childhood degenerative diseases. I want it established in record time with full financial transparency. Yes, I know other foundations exist, but I want a specific structure. And no, I don't want my name on it. It should be discreet. Finally, he called Michael, his main business partner. We need to talk about my schedule. From now on, I want Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday afternoons free. No exceptions. He paused, listening to protests on the other end. No, Michael, this isn't up for negotiation. Either we restructure the company to accommodate my new availability, or I reconsider my position as CEO. Hanging up, Richard felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He'd made risky business decisions countless times, but he'd never gambled so much on his personal life. His phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. Emily is a wonderful girl. Matthew's already asking when they can play again. Thank you for the special day. Richard smiled at the screen, typing his reply. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Emily spoke more today than in the last 6 months combined. How about Wednesday afternoon at the clinic? I can pick you up after Matthew's physical therapy. The reply came almost instantly. No need to trouble yourself. We took the bus as usual. Richard hesitated before answering. It's no trouble at all. In fact, I'd really like to be there, please. After a few minutes, Amanda replied, All right then, see you on Wednesday. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On Wednesday, Richard's routine was completely upended. In the morning, he held 3 important meetings via video conference instead of in person, ignoring the disapproving looks from his executives when he announced he'd be leaving the office at noon. Mr. Blackwood, the investors from South Korea, arrive at 3 p.m., his secretary reminded him, clearly concerned. Michael can greet them. He knows the project as well as I do, Richard replied, already gathering his things. For any emergencies, I'm available by phone, but only real emergencies, Monica. On the way to Hope Recovery Center, Richard asked the driver to stop at a toy store. An idea had come to him, and he wanted to act on it before he changed his mind. When he arrived at the center, Amanda was already in the waiting room, reading a worn book while waiting for Matthew's session to end. I hope I'm not late, Richard said, sitting beside her. Amanda smiled, marking the page before closing the book. Actually, you're right on time. Matthew should be done in 10 minutes. Emily's with the psychologist now. I asked for her. Sessions to be rescheduled to match the days Matthew comes to the center. That's very kind of you, Amanda said, studying Richard's face curiously. But I hope you're not rearranging your whole life over this. I know you're a busy man. Richard hesitated, considering his response. Actually, I am rearranging my life, but not just because of this. It's for me, too. For Emily. I realized I was losing sight of what really matters. Before Amanda could reply, the door to the physical therapy room opened, and Matthew came out in his wheelchair, accompanied by the therapist. Unlike other times, his face showed signs of pain and frustration. It was a tough day, the therapist explained quietly to Amanda. We had to push the stretching exercises a bit harder, and he felt more discomfort than usual. Amanda immediately knelt beside her son's chair. It's okay, sweetheart. Bad days happen. Let's go home and rest? Matthew shook his head. No, Mom. Emily's coming, remember. I promised to show her how to draw rockets. Richard watched the determination on the boy's face, impressed by his resilience. At 8 years old, Matthew displayed a strength of character many adults lacked. Matthew, I brought something for you, Richard said, stepping forward with a gift bag. I hope you like it. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. For me, why? It's not my birthday. Sometimes we get gifts just because someone thought of us, Richard explained, handing him the bag. Excitedly, Matthew opened the package, revealing a model rocket building kit, complete with LED lights and precise scientific details. Wow, the boy exclaimed, his pain momentarily forgotten. Look, Mom, it's a Saturn V, just like the one that took astronauts to the moon. Amanda glanced at Richard, a mix of gratitude and something that looked like concern. Thank you, but you didn't have to, she began, but was cut off by her son's infectious joy. This is amazing. I'll show Emily as soon as she gets— Here, can we build it together, Uncle Richard? Matthew asked, already examining the pieces through the packaging. Of course, if your mother allows it, replied Richard, feeling a wave of satisfaction at the boy's happiness. At that moment, Emily emerged from her therapy session accompanied by Dr. Catherine, who discreetly signaled to speak with Richard privately. I must say I'm impressed, Mr. Blackwood, the doctor remarked once they stepped aside. Emily actively participated in today's session. She even talked about her outing in the park with her friend Matthew. It's the most progress we've seen since her treatment began. Richard watched Emily run toward Matthew, her face lighting up at the sight of her friend. It wasn't me, Doctor. It was that boy right there. Whatever the case, keep encouraging this friendship. It's doing wonders for her emotional recovery, advised the doctor before saying goodbye. When Richard rejoined the group, Emily was already completely enchanted by the rocket kit, while Matthew excitedly explained how each part of the spacecraft worked. I thought we could go to my house to assemble this, Richard suggested. I have a room with a large table that would be perfect for the project, and we can order pizza afterward. Caroline visibly hesitated. That's very kind, but I don't want to impose. Besides, I need to check if there's a bus available later to get back home. It's no trouble at all, and I can arrange transportation for you on the way back, Richard assured her. Seeing Caroline still seemed reluctant, he added, Please? Emily looked so excited about the idea, and honestly, so am I. I can't remember the last time I built something with my own hands. Matthew's eyes lit up at the possibility. Can we go, Mom? Please? Caroline looked at her son, then at Emily and finally at Richard. With a sigh of surrender, she smiled. All right, but only for a few hours. During the ride in the luxurious SUV adapted to accommodate the wheelchair, Richard watched in the rearview mirror as the children chatted animatedly in the back seat. Emily, who had barely spoken a few words a day before meeting Matthew now, gestured enthusiastically as they discussed their plans for the rocket. She seems like a different child, Richard murmured to Caroline, seated beside him. Matthew has that effect on people, she replied with a proud smile. Ever since he was little, he's always been able to brighten any room, even after his diagnosis. How did you handle it? Richard asked, genuinely curious. When you found out about his condition? Caroline fell silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. At first, it was devastating. I kept asking myself, why my son? What did I do wrong? His father couldn't handle the pressure and left when Matthew was just 4, right after the diagnosis. Richard felt a lump in his throat. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was hard, but we grew stronger because of it. Caroline looked lovingly at her son. The real change happened when I realized I was so focused on what Matthew wouldn't be able to do in the future that I was missing the joy of what he could do in the present. We decided to take it one day at a time, celebrating every little victory. The words struck Richard deeply. Hadn't he been making the same mistake with Emily, so worried about fixing her problem that he forgot to appreciate who she was now? When they arrived at Richard's mansion in Bel Air, Caroline couldn't hide her astonishment at the imposing residence. With its 16,000 square feet, immaculately kept gardens and a staff greeting them at the entrance, the house was the embodiment of its owner's financial success. Your house is bigger than the mall near ours, exclaimed Matthew with the honesty typical of children, making Richard smile. Matthew, that's not something you say, Caroline gently scolded. It's all right, assured Richard, helping the driver unload the wheelchair. Actually, I agree with him. It's too big for just 2 people. To everyone's surprise, Emily took the initiative to show the house, holding Matthew's hand while one of the staff pushed his chair. Come on, Matthew, I'll show you my toy room. Richard and Amanda followed the children, watching how Emily seemed transformed in her role as hostess. In the enormous toy room on the 2nd floor, accessed by an internal elevator, Matthew looked in awe at the number of games, books, and toys, many still in their original packaging. Emily has so many toys, Matthew remarked, his tone not envious but simply observant. She does, Richard agreed, feeling a pang of sadness as he realized many of those gifts had been bought by him on business trips, perhaps to compensate for his absence. But I don't think she enjoys them as much as she enjoys playing with you in the park. After a tour of the house, which Matthew described as just like the castle in my storybooks, the group settled in the spacious dining room. With the help of Caroline, whom Richard had specially invited for the occasion, the table was set with drawing materials, glue, scissors, and the rocket kit. For the next 2 hours, something extraordinary happened at that table. Richard Blackwood, the feared CEO who made executives tremble in board meetings, was sitting on the floor, glue on his hands, carefully following the instructions of an 8-year-old boy on how to properly position the toy rocket's thrusters. Amanda watched the scene, alternating between helping with the assembly and taking photos with her simple phone. At one point, Richard caught her smiling with teary eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, while the children eagerly debated which color to use for part of the rocket. "Yes," she replied, quickly wiping away a stubborn tear. "It's just, I haven't seen Matthew this happy in so long. Sometimes I wonder how much time—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Richard understood the weight of what went unsaid. Duchenne muscular dystrophy was a progressive condition with no known cure. Matthew's time was precious. When the rocket was finally complete, with all its LED lights working, Matthew was beside himself with joy. "Look, Mom, it looks real. One day I'll build a real one and travel to space." "I'm sure you will, sweetheart," Amanda replied, her smile masking the pain of knowing her son's dreams would face barriers no mother could remove. After assembling the rocket, the promised pizza arrived, 3 different flavors in fact, along with sodas, juices, and a variety of desserts that made Matthew's eyes light up. During the impromptu dinner, Richard noticed how Emily ate with an appetite, something rare at home. She laughed at Matthew's jokes, joined the conversation, and, most surprisingly, maintained eye contact, all behaviors that had vanished after the accident. "Your daughter is amazing," Amanda whispered as they watched the children sharing a dessert. "She has such a big heart. Most kids would have a million questions about the wheelchair, but she just accepts Matthew as he is." "Emily's always been like that," Richard replied, a mix of pride and sorrow in his voice. "Before the accident, I mean. She always saw the best in people. I think I pulled away from her because I was afraid I wouldn't recognize that girl anymore. It was easier to bury myself in work than face what had happened." Amanda looked at him with understanding. "It's never too late to start over, Richard. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. When the night grew late and it was time to leave, Matthew was clearly exhausted, but glowing with happiness. The Saturn V rocket had been carefully packed for transport, along with some astronomy books Richard had found in his library, and insisted the boy borrow. "Are you sure you don't want me to send the driver to take you?" Richard asked, once more, as the taxi he'd called for Amanda and Matthew waited at the entrance. "You've already done more than enough today," Amanda replied gratefully. "Thank you for everything. It was a wonderful afternoon." Matthew waved energetically from the taxi window as they drove away. Emily, standing beside Richard, kept waving until the car disappeared from sight. "Did you enjoy the day, Princess?" Richard asked, holding his daughter's hand as they walked back into the mansion. "It was the best day ever, Daddy," Emily replied with a conviction that made Richard's heart tighten. "Can we do it again tomorrow?" "Not tomorrow, sweetheart, but soon, I promise." That night, as he tucked Emily into bed, quickly, becoming a ritual he refused to delegate, Richard realized something had shifted inside him too. The determination he'd always directed toward business now had a new focus. "Daddy," Emily called, already tucked under the covers. "Yes, Princess." "Will Matthew ever be able to walk again?" The question hit Richard like a punch. How could he explain such a complex and relentless medical condition to a 5-year-old? "I don't know, Emily," he answered honestly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Matthew's illness is very serious, but there are doctors studying ways to help children like him." Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. Then, with the simplicity and wisdom only children sometimes possess, she said, "You could help. You're rich and smart. Grandma always says that." Richard smiled tenderly, stroking his daughter's hair. "Maybe you're right, Emily. Maybe I can help in some way." "Matthew is my best friend now," Emily declared, her voice already heavy with sleep. I want him to be happy. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. After Emily fell asleep, Richard went to his study and did what he did best: research, analyze, and plan. He spent hours reading about muscular dystrophy, experimental treatments, and research foundations. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, he had not just a plan, but a new mission. The next day, to the shock of his executives, Richard cancelled his trip to Chicago to finalize the acquisition of a hotel chain, a deal he'd been planning for over a year. "Michael, you'll go in my place. I trust you to close the deal," he announced during the morning video conference, ignoring his team's stunned expressions. "Richard, you've personally worked on this project for 14 months. The investors expect your presence," Michael argued, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm aware of that, but I have other priorities now." Richard paused, feeling the weight of his next words. "In fact, since we're all here, I have some important announcements. Starting today, I'll be reducing my daily workload. I'll delegate some of my operational responsibilities and focus on strategic decisions." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Melissa, the CFO. "Richard, does this have to do with your health?" The genuine concern in her voice almost made Richard smile. It was easier for them to believe he was sick than to accept he was choosing to spend more time with his family. "No, Melissa, I'm perfectly healthy. But I've recently realized my daughter isn't, at least not emotionally. And I've decided to do something about it." He paused, observing the surprised expressions around him. "I'm also starting a new personal project, a research foundation focused on childhood neurodegenerative diseases, especially muscular dystrophy." "That's unexpected," commented Michael, still processing the information. "Any specific reason for this sudden interest?" Richard considered how much he should share. In the end, he opted for simplicity. "I met someone who changed my perspective. Sometimes we find purpose in the most unexpected places." The meeting continued with discussions about the company's reorganization and how to accommodate Richard's new priorities. Though there were legitimate concerns, no one dared to directly question the CEO's decision. Years of relentless leadership had established his authority in a way few would challenge. After the meeting, Richard called Amanda. It was the first time he'd taken the initiative to call, and he noticed a hint of nervousness in himself, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "Hello?" Amanda's cautious voice on the other end suggested she hadn't expected his call. "Amanda, it's Richard. I hope I'm not bothering you." "No, not at all. Matthew still won't stop talking about the rocket. I can't even get him to put it away for bedtime," she replied with a laugh. The light-hearted tone encouraged him to continue. "I'm glad. Actually, I'm calling with an invitation, or rather a proposal." "A proposal?" Caution crept back into her voice. "Don't worry, it's nothing inappropriate." Richard chose his words carefully. "I'm setting up a research foundation for childhood neurodegenerative diseases with a special focus on muscular dystrophy, and I'd like you to be part of the advisory board." The silence that followed was so long, Richard wondered if the call had dropped. "Amanda, are you still there?" "I am." Her voice was restrained now, as if carefully controlling every word. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can. Because I should." Richard took a deep breath. "Because Emily asked me to help her best friend, and I realized that at 5 years old, she has more wisdom than I've accumulated in my entire adult life." "Richard, I appreciate the gesture. I really do. But I can't accept." "Why?" The rejection caught him off guard. "Because I don't want Matthew to be a charity project to ease your conscience," Amanda replied firmly. "My son isn't a pity case or an opportunity for you to feel better about yourself." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "That's not it. I swear that's not it, isn't it?" Her tone softened slightly. "Then tell me honestly, if Emily hadn't befriended Matthew, would you have been interested in starting a muscular dystrophy foundation?" Richard hesitated. The honest answer was no, and they both knew it. "That's what I thought." Amanda continued after his silence. "Look, I'm not questioning your intentions. I believe they're good. But Matthew and I have our dignity, and I don't want him growing up feeling indebted to anyone, or worse, like an object of pity. Amanda, please hear me out. Richard rarely pleaded, but now he found himself doing just that. Yes, meeting Matthew was the catalyst, but what I'm proposing goes far beyond him. There are thousands of children facing the same condition, and if I have the resources to potentially make a difference, wouldn't it be wrong to ignore that? The foundation won't be about Matthew or me. It'll be about research, treatment, and family support. And I'd want you involved precisely because you know the reality firsthand, not from charts and statistics. There was another moment of silence, but this time less tense. What about the children's friendship? Amanda finally asked. If I turn down your project, will it affect their relationship? Absolutely not, Richard said immediately. These are completely separate things. Emily found a true friend, something she desperately needed. I would never interfere with that. I need to think, Amanda decided. This is too big to decide over a phone call. Of course, I understand. No pressure. Richard paused. But can I ask one more question? Yes? How is Matthew today? After the more intense exercises yesterday? The question seemed to surprise Amanda. He's okay considering the circumstances. He woke up in pain but insisted on going to school. Didn't want to miss science class where they were talking about the solar system. Said he needed to confirm some facts to tell Emily later. Richard smiled. He's truly extraordinary. Yes, he is, Amanda agreed, and for the first time in the conversation, her voice sounded completely unguarded. I'll think about your proposal, Richard. Really, I just need to make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons. That's all I ask. Thank you for hearing me out. As he hung up, Richard realized he was in uncharted territory. In the business world, he rarely faced rejection. His money and influence practically guaranteed his proposals would be accepted. But here, in this new realm of genuine human connections, the rules were completely different. And surprisingly, it didn't bother him. On the contrary, he felt invigorated by the challenge. In the weeks that followed, a new routine took shape in Richard's life. 3 afternoons a week were dedicated exclusively to Emily, often in the company of Matthew and Amanda. Their meetings sometimes took place at the Hope Recovery Center, other times in the park, occasionally at the Blackwood Mansion, and even, to Richard's initial shock, at the small apartment of the Sullivan O'Brien family. The first visit, to the 2-bedroom apartment in the Queen's housing complex, was an eye-opening experience for Richard and Emily. Used to spacious, luxurious surroundings, they both initially felt out of place in the compact space where Matthew and his mother lived. Yet what the apartment lacked in size, it made up for in warmth. The walls were decorated with Matthew's drawings and photographs of their small family. A worn but immaculately clean sofa took up most of the living room. On the simple bookshelf, carefully organized books shared space with the Saturn V rocket, proudly displayed at the center. "Welcome to our home," Amanda said with a mix of pride and hesitation. "It's not much, but it's ours." "It's cozy," Richard replied, sincerely watching as Emily immediately ran to Matthew's room, invited by the excited host. "His room is small but full of dreams," Amanda remarked as she prepared a simple coffee in the compact kitchen. "Every inch of the walls is covered with pictures of space, planets, astronauts. He's wanted to be an astronaut since he was 4, even before the diagnosis. I never let his condition kill that dream." Richard felt a lump in his throat. There was something deeply humbling about witnessing the dignity with which Amanda faced circumstances many would consider hopelessly tragic. In Matthew's room, Emily was enchanted by the homemade planetarium the boy had rigged up with a flashlight and a perforated ball. Stars danced across the darkened ceiling thanks to an improvised curtain, while Matthew, lying on his bed, explained each constellation with the precision of a tiny professor. "The sky is huge, Emily. It's the only place where it doesn't matter if your legs work or not. In space, everyone floats." The profound simplicity of the observation made Richard, watching from the doorway, swallow hard. That afternoon in the small apartment left a lasting impression on him. On the way home, Emily was unusually quiet, lost in thought. "Everything okay, Princess?" "Didn't you like Matthew's house?" Richard asked, concerned by her silence. Emily looked at her father with that seriousness that sometimes made Richard forget she was only 5. "Why do we have such a big house, and Matthew has such a small one?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that wasn't condescending or evasive. "Because I have a lot of money, Emily, and Matthew's mother has less," Richard finally explained. "But why? Do you work harder than her?" Richard hesitated. "How do you explain social inequality to a child?" "No, sweetheart. In fact, I think Caroline works as much as I do, maybe even more. But some people earn more money than others, even if they work the same amount or less. That doesn't seem fair," Emily concluded with the relentless logic of children. "No, it doesn't," Richard agreed, realizing he didn't have a better answer to offer. Surprisingly, it was this simple conversation with his daughter that finally crystallized the direction Richard wanted for his foundation. It wouldn't just be about medical research, but also about removing financial barriers to treatment, creating educational opportunities for children with limiting conditions, and above all, promoting dignity and independence. The following week, during one of their meetings at the clinic, Caroline asked to speak with Richard privately while the children were busy with a board game. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she began, sitting beside him in the waiting room. "About the foundation?" Richard nodded, trying not to show his anxiety. "And? I want to be part of it, but with a few conditions." "I'm listening." Caroline took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "First, I don't want it to be just about Matthew. I know he was the inspiration, but the foundation should help all children with similar conditions, regardless of personal connection." "I completely agree," Richard replied. "Second, I want to participate as a professional, not as the boy with Duchenne's mom. I have a nursing degree I've never been able to use because the hours weren't compatible with Matthew's care. I believe my experience, both professional and personal, could be valuable." Richard smiled, impressed once again by this woman's dignity and determination. "I agree with that too. In fact, I was thinking of offering you the role of coordinator for the family support program. No one understands the real needs better than someone living this reality. And third," Caroline hesitated, "I don't want this to change the children's relationship. They have a genuine friendship, something rare and precious. I don't want it to get complicated because of adult issues." "That's a priority for me too," Richard assured her. "Emily is improving every day thanks to that friendship. I'd never risk it." Caroline studied Richard's face, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "Then we're in agreement. I'll join your foundation." Richard extended his hand, and Caroline shook it firmly, sealing their commitment. It was the beginning of something neither could fully foresee. As they watched the children playing, oblivious to the adults' serious conversation, Richard reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. Just weeks ago, his world revolved solely around acquisitions, profits, and business expansion. Now, his priorities had been completely reshuffled. At that moment, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Michael. "We need to talk urgently. The board is questioning your recent decisions. They're worried about the company's future." Richard glanced at his phone, then at Emily, laughing as Matthew told an animated story. With a decisive motion, he silenced the device and slipped it into his pocket. Some decades of accumulated fortune could wait. The present, this precious and fragile present, could not. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers lot. Now continuing. The new direction Richard Blackwood's life had taken did not go unnoticed by the corporate world. 2 weeks after his conversation with Amanda, he faced an extraordinary meeting of the Blackwood Enterprises Board of Directors. The spacious conference room on the top floor of the company's headquarters was tense when Richard entered. Around the polished mahogany table, 10 executives watched him with expressions ranging from concern to disapproval. "Richard, thank you for joining us," began Michael, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "As you know, we requested this meeting because there are concerns about your recent shifts in priorities." Richard nodded calmly, taking his seat at the head of the table. A month ago, he would have entered dominating the room, demanding reports and immediate explanations. Today, something had shifted in his demeanor. Melissa, our finance department prepared a presentation on the impact of your absences these past weeks, Michael continued, signaling to the CFO. Melissa, visibly uneasy, began her presentation. Charts showed a correlation between Richard's reduced direct presence and a dip in investor confidence, reflected in a slight decline in stock value. As you can see, since the CEO scaled back his involvement in daily operations, particularly in Asian negotiations, we've observed a 4.3% contraction in the company's market value, Melissa explained. It's not alarming yet, but the trend is concerning. Thank you, Melissa, Michael interjected when she finished. Richard, no one here questions your right to a balanced personal life. We all understand caring for your daughter is a priority. However, as CEO and majority shareholder, your decisions impact thousands of employees and investors. Richard looked around the table, studying each face. Some of these executives had worked with him for over a decade. Together, they had built the Blackwood Empire through countless sleepless nights, intense negotiations and personal sacrifices. He understood their concerns. I appreciate everyone's candor, Richard began with a calm that surprised the room. You're right to be worried. I've significantly changed my approach, and that naturally causes apprehension. However, I need to clarify a few points. He stood and walked to the window, which offered a panoramic view of New York City. First, I'm not abandoning the company. I'm recalibrating my involvement. After 15 years leading every aspect of operations, I believe it's time to trust the executive team we've built together. Richard turned to face the board. Second, market fluctuations are expected during any transition. Our financial fundamentals remain strong, as Melissa's own report shows. What we're seeing is an emotional market reaction, not a real deterioration in performance. But Richard, perception is reality in capital markets, argued Charles, the head of investor relations. Confidence is directly tied to your personal presence in major negotiations. I partially agree, Charles, Richard replied. That's why I haven't stepped away entirely. I'm still involved in strategic decisions and critical negotiations. What's changed is that I'm no longer micromanaging operations you're all perfectly capable of handling. Richard returned to his seat at the head of the table. Finally, I'd like to present a concrete proposal. I am formalizing the creation of a CEO office where Michael will take on the role of operational CEO, while I retain the position of strategic CEO and chairman of the board. This structure is common in many multinational corporations and will allow the company to maintain its trajectory while I balance my new personal priorities. A murmur spread through the room. The proposal was unexpected but not entirely surprising. Michael had been widely respected and considered Richard's natural successor for years. Would this be permanent? Asked Melissa, voicing the question, lingering in the air. We'll start with a 6-month evaluation period, Richard replied. After that, we'll reassess the structure based on the results. Michael, would you be willing to take on this responsibility? All eyes turned to Michael, who seemed torn between professional ambition and loyalty to his friend and mentor. It would be an honor, Richard, but I need to be sure this is truly what you want, not an impulsive decision based on temporary circumstances. Richard smiled, acknowledging the unspoken concern. Many in the room likely thought he was going through some kind of midlife crisis or overreacting to Emily's condition. Michael, my friend, none of this is impulsive. In fact, this restructuring should have happened years ago. We built a company that has grown beyond any one person. It's time for our structure to reflect that reality. After another hour of discussion, the board finally agreed to the proposed arrangement. There would be a gradual transition over 1 month, followed by the 6-month evaluation period. Their carefully crafted statement would be sent to investors to minimize any market instability. When the meeting finally ended, Richard felt strangely light. For the first time in years, the weight of the company was no longer solely on his shoulders. It was a liberating feeling. As he left the building, he received a message from Amanda with a photo of Matthew and Emily at the public library. both engrossed in a large book about the solar system. Under Caroline's supervision, the children were having an astronaut study afternoon, as Matthew had dubbed the outing. Richard smiled at the image. His daughter, who months ago barely spoke or showed interest in anything, now had her own passion, joining her friend in his imaginary cosmic explorations. The contrast couldn't be clearer. While he scaled back his involvement in the financial empire he'd built, Emily was expanding her emotional universe through a genuine friendship. The following Sunday, Richard organized a special picnic in the park. This time, in addition to him, Emily, Amanda, and Matthew, there was one more person, Dr. Robert Mitchell, one of the leading experts on Duchenne muscular dystrophy in the United States, whom Richard had invited to meet the family informally. "Don't mention Matthew's condition unless he or Amanda brings it up," Richard instructed the doctor as they waited for the others. "I want this to feel natural. You're here as my friend, not as their doctor." Dr. Robert nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. "I completely understand, but Richard, I need you to understand something too. There are no miracles in this field. I can offer guidance, access to cutting-edge treatments, but—" "I know," Richard gently interrupted. "I'm not looking for false hope. I just want to ensure they have access to the best possible care, whatever the prognosis." When Amanda arrived, with Matthew, introductions were made casually, with no mention of Robert's medical specialty. The group enjoyed a relaxed lunch, with the children enthusiastically talking about the book they had discovered at the library, full of facts about the International Space Station. "And did you know astronauts have to exercise every day in space? Otherwise their muscles get weak because there's no gravity," Matthew explained excitedly. Dr. Robert smiled, genuinely charmed by the boy's knowledge and enthusiasm. "You seem to know a lot about space. Have you ever thought about becoming an astronaut?" "I am going to be an astronaut," Matthew declared, with conviction. "I'm already training." "It's true," Amanda confirmed with a wistful smile. "He calls his physical therapy astronaut training." As the children ran off to play under Caroline's supervision, the adults had a chance to talk more freely. "Richard mentioned you're starting a foundation," Robert commented, turning to Amanda. "It's an admirable project." "We're still in the early stages," she replied, still visibly uncomfortable with the topic. "Honestly, I only agreed to be part of it because it's meant to be bigger than just, well, bigger than our own situation." Robert nodded understandingly. "The best social projects often start that way, from personal experiences that grow, to help others in similar circumstances." The conversation naturally shifted to Robert's work at the University Medical Center, where he oversaw a department specializing in neuromuscular diseases. Without directly mentioning Matthew, he shared updates on recent advancements in the field. "Right now we're involved in an international study on gene therapy," he explained. "The preliminary results are promising, especially when treatment begins in the early stages of the condition." Amanda listened intently, her eyes occasionally drifting to Matthew, who was now showing Emily how to make a special paper airplane that could fly all the way to the moon. "This study, are you accepting new patients?" she finally asked, her voice betraying the hope she was trying to contain. "The current protocol is closed to new participants," Robert answered honestly. "But we're planning a new phase next semester with broader eligibility criteria." Richard observed the exchange, aware he was walking a fine line. He didn't want Amanda to feel he was manipulating the situation, but he also couldn't ignore the resources and connections at his disposal. "Robert runs the top neuromuscular research clinic in the country," Richard remarked casually. "I thought he might be a good consultant for our foundation, helping direct resources to the most promising studies." "It would be a privilege," Robert agreed. "And if you're comfortable, Amanda, I'd like to learn more about Matthew's case. Not to interfere with his current treatment, but to get a clearer picture of the real needs of families the Foundation aims to support." Amanda studied both men for a moment, clearly weighing the intentions behind the offer. "Matthew has a good doctor in the public system," she finally replied. "Dr. Paul has been wonderful considering the limited resources he works with." "I completely understand," Robert assured her. "This isn't about replacing anyone but complementing care." Sometimes a second opinion or access to research protocols can make a difference. Amanda took a deep breath, her eyes finding Matthew in the distance again. I'll think about it, and I'll need to talk to Dr. Paul, too. He's been with Matthew since the diagnosis, and we trust him. Absolutely right, Robert agreed. Continuity of care is essential. Any new intervention should be coordinated with his current team. Richard watched with admiration as Robert managed to be both professional and humane, offering hope without creating unrealistic expectations. That was exactly why he had chosen him for this first meeting. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with the conversation drifting to lighter topics. When it was time to say goodbye, Robert knelt to be at Matthew's eye level. "It was a pleasure meeting a future astronaut," he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake that delighted the boy. "Did you know I have a telescope in my office? If your mother ever allows it, you could come visit it." Matthew's eyes widened. "A real telescope? One that can see planets and everything?" "Exactly. On clear nights, we can even see the rings of Saturn." "Mom, can we go? Please, please," Matthew begged, turning to Amanda with pleading eyes. Amanda hesitated only a moment before smiling. "We'll see, sweetheart. First, we should thank Mr. Blackwood for this wonderful day." As they said their goodbyes, Richard felt that a small but significant barrier had been crossed. Amanda still had her reservations, as was her right, but the seed of trust had begun to sprout. In the car on the way home, Emily was unusually quiet, as she always was after saying goodbye to Matthew. "Did you have fun today, Princess?" Richard asked, watching her thoughtful expression in the rearview mirror. "Yes, Daddy." Emily stayed silent for a few more seconds before asking the question that was clearly on her mind. "That man, your friend, he's a doctor, isn't he?" Richard was surprised by his daughter's perceptiveness. "Yes, he is." "How did you know?" "He talked like the doctors at the center, and he looked at Matthew the way they look at me." Emily adjusted her doll in her lap before continuing. "Is he going to help Matthew's legs get better?" The question felt like a stab to Richard's heart. How do you explain the complexity and relentlessness of a degenerative disease to a 5-year-old? "Emily, Dr. Robert is a very good doctor, and he can help Matthew in many ways, but your friend's condition is complicated." "But you're rich, Daddy. My teacher always says you're the richest man in the city. Can't you buy medicine to cure him?" The innocence of the question held a wisdom that made Richard swallow hard. "It doesn't work like that, sweetheart. There are problems that all the money in the world can't fix right away. But that doesn't mean we should give up. We can use our resources to support research, to make sure Matthew gets the best treatment possible, to make his life more comfortable." Emily processed the information in silence for a few moments. "So you're trying to help?" "Yes, Princess, I'm trying to help. Not just Matthew, but other kids like him too." "That's good," Emily concluded with the straightforward simplicity of children. "Matthew deserves to be happy. He's my best friend." The next morning, Richard received an unexpected message from Amanda. "Matthew hasn't stopped talking about the telescope. I spoke with Dr. Paul, who knows and respects Dr. Robert very much. He thinks a consultation would be beneficial. If the offer still stands, we'd like to schedule a visit." Richard smiled at his phone, feeling a wave of relief. It wasn't a magic solution, but it was a step in the right direction. As he replied to the message, Victoria entered his office with a concerned expression. "Sir, there's a situation that requires your immediate attention. The Singapore headquarters is threatening to re-evaluate the entire partnership after the leadership changes." Richard nodded, putting his phone away. "Schedule a video conference for this afternoon. Michael and I will speak with them together. And sir, your ex-wife called for the 3rd time this week." This took Richard by surprise. Hannah rarely reached out, preferring to communicate through her lawyers for matters related to Emily. "Did she say what she wanted?" "Only that it's urgent and personal," replied Victoria, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll call her back after the meeting with Singapore," Richard decided, intrigued by what could be so urgent for Hannah to abandon her usual distance. The video conference with the Singapore partners took more time and energy than Richard had anticipated. convincing international investors that the leadership restructuring was a positive evolution, not a sign of instability, required all his diplomatic skills. By the time he finally had a moment to return Hannah's call, it was already past 7 in the evening. His finger hovered over the number for a moment. Conversations with his ex-wife were rarely pleasant, usually limited to practical matters about Emily. "Hannah, it's Richard. I got your messages." Finally, her voice sounded tense with that slight French accent she'd picked up in recent years in London. "We need to talk about Emily. I'm in New York City." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. Hannah in New York City meant complications. Did something happen? Yes, it did. I got calls from Caroline, from the school, even from Dr. Catherine, all talking about a miraculous transformation in Emily over the last few months. A daughter who, as far as I knew, was still practically mute after the accident. There was accusation in her words, and Richard couldn't entirely blame her. He hadn't properly shared Emily's recent progress himself. "Emily really is doing better, Hannah. She's made significant progress. And I find out from other people." The hurt in her voice was clear. "They said she has a new friend, a boy with some serious illness, that you've been spending more time with her, that you're reorganizing your life. What's going on, Richard?" Richard took a deep breath. "Can we meet tomorrow? There's a lot to explain, and I'd rather do it in person." The next day, Richard met Hannah at the cafe in the hotel where she was staying. Despite their 3 years apart, he still felt a mix of emotions seeing her, the mother of his child, the woman he'd shared a decade of his life with before. They'd both let the relationship crumble under his work obsession and her subsequent retreat after the accident. "You look different," Hannah remarked after their initial greetings. "Less rigid." Richard smiled slightly. "I am different. Everything is different now." Over the next 2 hours, Richard told the whole story. Meeting Matthew, the inexplicable connection between the children, how the boy in the wheelchair had achieved what no expensive therapist could, bringing Emily back to the world. He talked about Amanda, her impressive dignity in adversity, and how that family had unwittingly taught him lessons no business success could provide. "So, you created a foundation for muscular dystrophy research?" Hannah asked, visibly surprised. Anne stepped back from the company. "Who are you and what have you done with Richard Blackwood?" The question, though playful, carried real weight. Richard knew he wasn't the same man Hannah had left. "I realized I was losing what really matters," he answered honestly. "Emily needed me, not my money or hired specialists, and I needed her too." Hannah studied her ex-husband for a long moment. "I came here ready for a battle. I was going to demand primary custody, accuse you of emotional neglect. I even had a letter from my therapist in London detailing how my recovery from the trauma of the accident was complete. But now, pressured Richard when she hesitated. "Now I see that maybe it's time for all of us to heal old wounds," added Hannah. "I want to see Emily. I want to meet this boy who achieved what none of us could." The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional. Emily, initially hesitant, was soon in Hannah's arms, excitedly talking about her friend Matthew and their plans to help him build a real rocket someday. "And Matthew knows everything about astronauts, Mum. He's going to take me to Mars when we grow up." Hannah looked at Richard over their daughter's head, silent tears streaming down her face. There was wonder in her eyes, and also a quiet regret for the lost time. The following Sunday, Hannah joined Richard and Emily for their regular meetup, with Matthew and Amanda in the park. The boy, always cheerful despite the increasing pain in his body, charmed Hannah with his encyclopedic knowledge of space and his unshakable determination. "He's truly extraordinary," Hannah remarked as they watched the children play. "I can see why Emily connected so deeply with him." "Matthew sees possibilities where others see limitations," replied Amanda, who had welcomed Hannah, kindly, without judgment. "It's a rare gift." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Hannah, who had studied cultural management in London, began talking about art therapy programs she had encountered in Europe, specifically designed for children with limiting conditions. "Artistic expression can be liberating for children like Matthew," she explained, her enthusiasm growing. I know of a wonderful program that uses virtual reality to let children with limited mobility dance and create art in virtual spaces. Amanda's face lit up. Matthew has always loved drawing. I can only imagine what it would be like for him to create without physical limitations. Richard watched the interaction with growing admiration. Hannah, who had fled the United States to escape painful memories of the accident, was now speaking excitedly about how she could contribute to the foundation, bringing these innovative techniques to American children. "Maybe I could stay in New York City a little longer," she commented later when they were alone. "Rebuild my relationship with Emily, contribute to this project. If you think it's a good idea." "I think it would be wonderful," Richard replied sincerely. "Emily misses you, more than she can express, and I believe we have much to learn from you." In the weeks that followed, a new dynamic took shape. Hannah rented an apartment near Richard's home, allowing frequent visits with Emily. The relationship between the former spouses, once marked by resentment and formal communication through lawyers, gradually transformed into a partnership focused on their daughter's well-being. Meanwhile, the foundation took concrete form. With the scientific direction of Dr. Robert, the family support program coordinated by Amanda, and now the art therapy component led by Hannah, the project grew beyond initial expectations. One afternoon, after a particularly productive foundation meeting, Richard walked Amanda to the bus stop, as had become their habit. "You've turned something personal into something that will benefit hundreds of families," she said with genuine admiration. "That's meaningful, Richard." "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "In fact, I wouldn't have even started without you and Matthew." Amanda smiled, that smile that always carried both strength and vulnerability. "You know what amazes me the most? It wasn't your money that made the real difference. It was your presence. For Emily, for Matthew, for the project." The words struck Richard deeply. For years he had believed his main contribution to the world was financial, building businesses, creating jobs, accumulating wealth. The idea that his mere presence, his time and attention could be more valuable than his money was revolutionary. "The bus is coming," Amanda warned, interrupting his thoughts. "I'll see you tomorrow at the appointment with Dr. Robert." "I'll be there," Richard promised. Then, on impulse, he added, "Actually, I was thinking, the trip to your place is long and it's already getting dark. Can I offer you a ride?" To his surprise, Amanda accepted. It would be nice to get home earlier today. Matthew has been more tired lately. In the car, the conversation flowed naturally about the foundation's progress, the children and future plans. When they arrived at the housing complex, Richard insisted on walking her to the door, a courtesy he wouldn't have considered a few months earlier. "Would you like to come in for a bit?" Amanda invited. "Matthew would be happy to show you how the solar system model they're building for the science fair is coming along." The project was a collaboration between Matthew and Emily, with guidance from a volunteer professor at Columbia University, who had taken an interest in the case after a lecture by Dr. Robert. Inside the small apartment, Richard found Matthew in the living room, surrounded by craft supplies, styrofoam balls painted like planets, and metal wires forming orbits. Despite his obvious physical fatigue, the boy's enthusiasm was contagious. "Uncle Richard, look, we've already finished Jupiter, and now we're working on Saturn. Emily will add the rings tomorrow at school." Richard knelt beside the wheelchair, genuinely impressed by the meticulous work. "This is amazing, Matthew. You've thought of everything. We want to win first place," the boy confided. "Then I can use the prize to buy a telescope for me and one for Emily. I've been saving up to." Amanda gave Richard a look that said, "Don't interfere." She knew her son well and respected his desire to earn things on his own merit, not through charity. "I'm sure you have a great chance," Richard replied, honoring the boy's dignity. "This is the best solar system model I've ever seen." Later, after Matthew had fallen asleep, Amanda offered Richard a simple coffee in the small kitchen. "He's getting weaker," she said quietly. "Dr. Robert confirms the disease is progressing as expected. The new medications are helping with the discomfort," but she didn't need to finish. They both knew the relentless reality of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. "But every day is a victory," Amanda continued. lifting her chin with the determination that always impressed Richard. "And they're good days, Richard, full of joy, purpose, and love. Many people live decades without experiencing what Matthew does every day." At that moment, looking at this extraordinary woman who faced the unimaginable with such grace, Richard felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty, a deep understanding of what truly mattered. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he said simply. Amanda smiled. "I'm not strong, I just don't have the luxury of being weak." "I disagree," Richard replied. "True strength isn't about having no choice, but in how you choose to face what life gives you. And you, Amanda, choose every day to face it with dignity, love, and hope." 3 months later, the New Horizons Foundation was officially launched at a quiet but meaningful event. Richard had insisted he wanted no excessive publicity, no name attached to the project, no attempt to use the initiative as corporate marketing. In the small wheelchair-accessible auditorium, families of children with neuromuscular diseases gathered to learn about support programs, experimental treatment opportunities, and adaptive art and technology initiatives. Emily and Matthew, inseparable as always, proudly welcomed the guests, handing out small star-shaped pins, a symbol chosen by the foundation at Matthew's suggestion. Stars shine even in the darkest nights. Hannah, elegant in a simple dress, coordinated the demonstration of virtual reality equipment that allowed children to fly in virtual worlds, free from physical limitations. Her project had become one of the Foundation's most celebrated. Dr. Roberts spoke with families, patiently explaining the possibilities and limitations of treatments, always honest but never without hope. And Amanda, in her new role as family support coordinator, welcomed parents with the knowledge and empathy of someone who had walked the same path. Richard watched everything from a quiet corner, feeling a satisfaction no billion-dollar acquisition had ever given him. Michael, who had attended the event, approached with a genuine smile. "I never thought I'd say this, but you were right to step back from the company," admitted the new operational CEO. "Last quarter's results were excellent, and you seem at peace." "I am, Michael. For the first time in a long while." Just then, Matthew wheeled over in his chair with Emily bouncing excitedly beside him. "Uncle Richard, we want to show you something. Come see." The children led them to a side room, where the model of the solar system they had created was on display. Beside it, a framed certificate confirmed their first-place win in the school science fair. "We won!" Emily announced proudly. "And there's one more surprise. Show him, Matthew." The boy, his eyes sparkling with excitement, pulled 2 identical small telescopes from a bag. "We bought them with the prize money. One for me and one for Emily, exactly the same. Now we can look at the same stars even when we're far apart." Richard felt his eyes well up, something he would have considered an unacceptable show of weakness just months before. Now, though, he allowed himself the vulnerability, kneeling to hug both children. "You two are extraordinary, you know." "That," he said, his voice thick, "absolutely extraordinary." When he looked up, he saw Amanda and Hannah watching the scene, both with touched smiles. The 2 women who, under entirely different circumstances, had transformed his understanding of what it meant to love and be loved. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement, Richard found Amanda on the Foundation's small balcony, gazing at the starry sky. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, joining her. "How unpredictable life is," she replied, not taking her eyes off the stars. "A year ago I was working 2 jobs, exhausted, worried about how I'd pay for Matthew's next treatment. Now I'm running a program that will help hundreds of families like ours. And I was consumed by the next acquisition, the next billion, completely disconnected from what really mattered," Richard added. "It took seeing my daughter smile at a boy in a wheelchair to finally understand the real value of things." Amanda turned to him. "What amazes me most is that you didn't just change your life. You're using your privilege to change others." "Lives too. That's rare." "I learned from the best," Richard replied, glancing meaningfully inside, where Matthew slept peacefully. That boy taught me more about courage, dignity, and joy than all the business leaders I've ever met." Amanda smiled, and in that smile Richard saw not just the present with all its challenges, but also a possible future, one where perhaps with time and patience there might be room for something more between them. "The sky is particularly beautiful tonight," he remarked, gazing at the stars. "Matthew would say the stars were always there," Amanda replied softly. "We just needed to stop and look up." Richard nodded, understanding the deep truth in those simple words. Some of life's greatest treasures had always been within reach. He had just been too busy looking in the wrong direction. There, under the starry sky, beside an extraordinary woman fate had placed in his path, Richard Blackwood, the man who once measured success only in bank account zeros, finally understood what it meant to be truly rich. The end of the story. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Your opinion means the world to us. How did you feel witnessing Richard's transformation? Share your own story of overcoming in the comments.